Buzzer beaters, tip-ins, upsets, we got it all on this episode as we explore the 15 greatest shots in Gonzaga basketball history on today's Locked On Zags.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, we are getting to a long ago asked mailbag question from my guy, Jeff, via Gmail. Jeff asked to talk and rank the greatest shots in Gonzaga basketball history, specifically at the time asking where Julian Strawther's shot against UCLA would rank all time. He sent some suggestions, sent a follow-up. I said, hey, we're going to get to it. We're going to do a whole show about it. Took a little longer than I expected with all the realignment and various other news stories going on this summer for Gonzaga, but we are going to get to it today. 5 different shots in each segment, culminating at the very end with the greatest shot in Gonzaga basketball history. And this is subjective. All this to say, I kind of tried to weigh shots that had more impact in terms of, game winners in NCAA tournaments and games that the Zags actually won. We do have some shots on here that, tied a game that went into overtime that Gonzaga eventually lost, but, tried to weigh those a little bit differently, non-conference games versus conference games versus tournament games. All this to say, you all are going to disagree with parts of this list. Everybody does. That's the part of making lists that just generates controversy or conversation, whatever it may be. If you have disagreements, if you have questions, if you have shots you thought should have been on here, whatever, please leave them in the comments. I ask that you be respectful because we're having fun in early September talking about the best shots in school history. It shouldn't be a contentious activity. I left off some of my favorite shots in Gonzaga history that I didn't think were as impactful. One of my favorite shots of all time is in the Gonzaga-Portland game when Przemek Karnowski thought that there was no time left on the shot clock and pulled up from deep 3 NBA range and cashed it in. Amazing shot, no real relevance, so I didn't include it, but those kind of shots didn't make it in here. Kelly Olynyk dunking all over Brad Waldo at St. Mary's was an all-time moment, but I did not include that here. Without further ado, I'm going to get into them, ranking them from 15 down to 1. Number 15 here, Tony Skinner tip-in versus Arizona in the 2003 NCAA tournament. This tied the game and sent it into overtime. He hit this thing basically right at the buzzer to send this game into overtime. And of course, ultimately went into double overtime. The Zags did lose this game, which is part of the reason it's a little bit lower, but I do think that this is an important game for Gonzaga, just in terms of their history. The Gonzaga-Arizona rivalry is kind of in part because of this game. And in 2003, Gonzaga was, they've made the tournament 4 years in a row and had really kind of started to establish themselves as a consistent team here. But going toe-to-toe with Arizona, going into double overtime, even if they lost, kind of continued to help prove that this program is not a pushover that you can just, run over in March. And Skinner making that shot, that may not have gotten to that point had he not done so. Number 14, Gary Bell, three-pointer with about 30 seconds left on the road against Oklahoma State in November of 2012. This was my senior year. It was a game we watched on TV, of course, because it was on the road. The Zags were ranked 13th at the time. Oklahoma State was ranked 22nd at the time. The Zags would go on to earn their first number 1 ranking in school history during that season. They don't do that if they don't beat Oklahoma State on the road. That was a critical game for them. This was kind of still in the era where Gonzaga was struggling to schedule a true road game against Oklahoma State. Was great. They played Illinois that year. They played West Virginia that year. They played Butler that year in a very famous game that had a shot that's probably on Butler's list, but not on any Gonzaga list with Roosevelt Jones. But regardless, Gary Bell making this shot is part of the reason that directly leads to Gonzaga getting that number 1 ranking for the first time in school history. So I have to include it here. Number 13, one of my favorite rivalry shots of all time, Rui Hachimura's game-winning mid-range versus Washington in that 2018 season. He hit a shot from the free throw line with 0.6 seconds left. One of my favorite quotes is from Josh Perkins when he looked up and he was like, they weren't guarding Rui at a spot where he's automatic. Yeah, that's how I remember the game. They got Rui the ball in a spot where he scores 90% of the time. He turned around and cashed in a shot with half a second left, beat Washington, helped secure their 12th win in the last 13 against UW. And UW had been ranked that year. They had fallen out of the top 25 by the time this game happened, but this was a good University of Washington team. Again, the rivalry had only recently gotten restarted when this game happened, so Rui kind of helped put that rivalry back on the map with a really impressive game-winning shot against Gonzaga's regional rival. Number 12, the first one of two from this most recent season, Julian Strawther. Pull-up game winner versus BYU on the road in 2023. You all remember this shot. It didn't happen that long ago. Again, conference games, especially conference games that Gonzaga is expected to win. I don't know that too many shots would be on here. For example, Rasir Bolton's game winner is not on this list, even though it is a fantastic shot against San Francisco, because Gonzaga was expected to beat San Francisco, needing a game winner to beat a team that you are significantly better than. No disrespect to last year's Don's team. They were good, but that was a game that Gonzaga should have won. The same can be said for BYU. I will admit that, but this was the last time Gonzaga played BYU at their arena in the WCC. It was a sending away present, a gift, a going away present for BYU as they go into the Big 12. Last time they played Gonzaga, that place was packed. The BYU fans are rowdy and rambunctious. They always have been. They wanted to beat Gonzaga in that final time so badly. It looked like they were going to. And Julian pulls up with no regard, with no conscience, just drills that three with 9.5 seconds left. Also, shout out to Anton Watson for playing fantastic defense on the end of the floor. If he doesn't do that, this game may not be on this shot, may not be in this conversation at all. But Julian showed the clutch gene. This was not his only, of course, clutch shot of the season. We'll get to one of them later, but he also hit a couple of really clutch threes against Xavier in that PK 85 game. They didn't make the list here, but a reminder of how clutch Julian Strawther is and was in a Gonzaga uniform. Denver's going to love that when he's playing for the Nuggets next season. Number 11, last one here in the first segment, Elias Harris, game-tying three in the WCC Championship versus St. Mary's. I kind of had struggled to know where to put this one because Gonzaga did ultimately lose this game. But hitting a game-tying three at the buzzer to send a WCC Championship game into overtime is extremely impressive. This was my junior year of college. I did not go to Vegas this year. I went the next year. I had many friends who were in Las Vegas for this game, for this shot. They can all tell you how incredible it was to see this. The game goes into OT. Matthew Dellavedova helps seal it for the Gales. The Gales punched their ticket. Gonzaga actually had to sweat it out a little bit to make sure they actually made the tournament. It's one of the last times they really were sweating it out in the selection Sunday. But a tremendous shot, an all-time classic game between Gonzaga and St. Mary's. Another one that's kind of, when you're talking about this rivalry, you know, there's so many games that come to mind, so many players, so many moments. And Elias Harris hitting this three and sending this game into overtime is unquestionably on that list, and an all-time moment for Gonzaga and for Harris, even if, again, it did not result in a win. Harris also had a game winner against Illinois in 2010, which I considered putting on here as well. There was a handful of Gonzaga non-conference game-winning shots versus Power 5 schools, and I kind of had to pick which ones I wanted to choose, and really Gary's against Oklahoma State was kind of the biggest one that I picked because it helped lead to that number one ranking, but Elias Harris is a guy who had a couple of those as well. Well, we got two epic NCAA tournament game winners, a WCC tournament game winner, and perhaps Adam Morrison's most famous shot in a Gonzaga uniform, all coming up after a word from today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's super easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, and then you just have to add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. From there, simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so that you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and ultimately hire. Let's be honest, adding the right team member can have a positive and measurable impact on your business. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. We got more fun stuff coming your way later this week, lining up some good guests to finish out September before we get into October and the start of our individual player preview series before college basketball is back, November. We're getting closer and closer every day, folks, so stick with us here on the Locked On Zags podcast. For now, we're going to continue ranking the 15 greatest shots in Gonzaga basketball history. We talked 15 through 11 in that first segment. Now we get into the top 10. And coming in at number 10 is our first women's basketball shot on the list, Zakira Rice. Game-winning lay-in in double overtime against St. Mary's in 2019. Back-to-back shots against St. Mary's in the WCC tournament. This sent Gonzaga to the WCC championship game. This was an incredibly emotional game. For those who do not remember, Laura Stockton and Jill Townsend both got injured during this game. Stockton ended up missing a huge amount of time with a knee injury. Jill Townsend, I can't remember how long she missed, but she missed the rest of this season. I think she did come back healthy the following year. But both these players get hurt during the game. The game goes into double overtime. They're severely understaffed because they're missing two of their key players. Zakira Rice hits this lay-in, sends Gonzaga to the WCC championship. They got waxed by BYU in that championship, in part because, of course, of the loss of Stockton and Townsend, but still the opportunity to beat your rival, even though on the women's side, Gonzaga and BYU is more the rivalry. Still good to see a victory over St. Mary's, especially an emotional victory like that in double overtime. And Gonzaga, even after they lost to BYU, they still got a 5 seed in that NCAA tournament, and I'm sure they wouldn't have gotten nearly that high had they not been able to secure that victory over St. Mary's. Number 9, Adam Morrison. First Adam Morrison shot on this list, a banked 3 versus Oklahoma State in the battle in Seattle in 2006. Folks, this is the defining moment of Gonzaga's battle in Seattle, an event that happened for many, many years. Gonzaga is playing games at Climate Pledge Arena. I don't know if they called the Alabama game the battle in Seattle, or if they're going to call this UConn game the battle in Seattle. I don't know if they're branding it as such. It doesn't seem like they are, but when Gonzaga had their one game in Seattle every year and it was consistently called the battle in Seattle, this shot, this Adam Morrison fadeaway banked 3 at the buzzer to beat Oklahoma State, it is the defining shot. You watch highlight packages of Gonzaga basketball, you see this shot. You listen to highlight reels about Gonzaga basketball, you hear the call for this shot. It is perhaps Adam Morrison's greatest, most defining shot as a member of Gonzaga basketball. And it is the first non-WCC or NCAA tournament shot on this list, meaning that the next 8 shots that we are going to talk about all happened in either a WCC tournament or an NCAA tournament. So this is the greatest non-tournament shot in Gonzaga basketball history on my list. And I think many would agree because it is kind of a memorable moment in Gonzaga basketball, a memorable moment in Adam Morrison's career, and really just one of those shots that, like I said, is going to be played on all those highlight reel packages for an eternity when talking about Gonzaga basketball. Number 8, Zach Norvell staves off a 13-4 upset with a late 3 versus UNC Greensboro in 2018. I kind of forgotten about this game when I was doing some research and using the list that Jeff sent and had some of these shots on it. And Gonzaga almost suffered a pretty catastrophic 4-13 upset in that 2018 NCAA tournament. The game was tied 64-64. Zach Norvell created a quarter inch of separation against his defender and pulled up for 3 with 21 seconds left. Nothing but net from Norvell. The Zags, of course, went on to win. They held Greensboro to they didn't score on that final shot. And it helped kind of avoid the type of losses that people seem to think Gonzaga suffers all the time. Oh, they're going to get in the tournament and lose to the first good team they play like always, which is just a ridiculous sentiment that has been proven unequivocally to not be true. But this is the kind of game that people would have pinned on them. And for Gonzaga to secure a win over a good Greensboro team, again, this is a 4-13 upset here. Gonzaga then went on to beat Ohio State, in part also because of Zach Norvell, who had a big 3 with under a minute left against Ohio State. The Sweet 16 streak would be over, or it never really would have happened, I suppose. I guess Gonzaga would currently be on a much smaller Sweet 16 streak, but right now the streak that Gonzaga has is because Zach Norvell hit that 3 against UNC Greensboro. It is because he also hit a 3 with less than a minute left against Ohio State. Gonzaga ultimately lost in their next game to a 9 seed, Florida State. I remember when Gonzaga got into the Sweet 16 and they were a 4 seed playing a 9 seed instead of a 1 seed. Everybody thought this is going to be great. Gonzaga is going to be able to win. Florida State was a huge team. Killian Tilly was hurt right before the game, was unable to play, and we all know what happened after that. But Gonzaga doesn't even get into that spot. They don't even get into that position without those 2 big shots from Zach Norvell, which is why they come in at number 8. I kind of combined them, I suppose, but that's why these 2 come in here at number 8 on this list. Number 7, another shot from the women's basketball team, Jill Townsend's flu game winner over BYU. I think many of you will remember this. This one happened in March of 2021. Another game that just had a kind of epic storyline for Gonzaga. The team had a huge flu bug. It went through the staff. It went through the players. Many players were not playing at 100%. Some were not playing at all. Leanne Worth did not play in this game. Jill Townsend did not start. And in fact, she did not play until towards the very end of the game. And in fact, she only scored 2 points in this entire game. And it was at the buzzer in this game. Literally, she caught the ball, turned around, faded away, threw it up, nothing but net, ball game, ran down the floor. BYU is done. Gonzaga is winning the WCC championship. It was a team that may not have made the NCAA tournament without winning that game. This shot legitimately put Gonzaga into the tournament. And they ended up losing in the first round of the NCAA tournament after that. So, again, another situation where it didn't lead to a lot more games, but it still led to an all-time moment in that Gonzaga-BYU rivalry. And anytime you hit a game winner to win a championship, hard to not include that pretty high on this list. Number 6, we're getting to the real good ones, folks. We're getting to the ones that a lot of people are going to argue for any of these next 6 to be top 5 type shots. This one here comes in. Dimitri Goodson game-winning layup over Western Kentucky in March of 2009. Again, this is similar to that Zach Norvell shot of it was a shot that won a game that Gonzaga should have won. So it basically just helped them avoid what would have been a catastrophic upset. Back in 2009, Gonzaga getting upset maybe wouldn't have ruffled feathers the same way that it would have in 2018. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but the Zags were almost going to lose a 12-4 upset game here in the second round of the NCAA tournament. They were a 4 seed who had already won their first round game. 12 seed in Western Kentucky had already beat a 5 seed and looked like they were about to move to the Sweet 16 as a 12 seed. Doesn't happen all that often, but Dimitri Goodson catches an inbounds pass, goes coast to coast in like 3 seconds, 4 seconds, something like that, scores the game-winning lay-in, and that's it. I love the decision by Mark Few to not call a timeout here, to just let Meach go to the rim, get some separation, find his way to the basket. It was an incredible shot, an incredible moment, led to Gonzaga getting a chance to play North Carolina, the number 1 seed, in the next round. Of course, they got waxed by Tyler Hansborough and the Tar Heels. That was an incredible North Carolina team, but wouldn't have even been in that situation had it not been for Dimitri Goodson hitting that coast-to-coast lay-in. Well, folks, you can probably guess the most of the rest of the shots that still have to be discussed, including one from last season and, of course, the one that put Gonzaga on the map in the first place. All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Game Time. Life is always so busy, and the last thing that I need is to be stressed out over buying tickets to events. Thankfully, there's Game Time, which has killer deals on last-minute tickets for all of the events that I want to go to. When choosing seats for events, I always get stressed out about trying to pick the right ones because I'm worried about the view. However, Game Time has images of views from your seat so that you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. They have deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets from football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Folks, we are down to the top 5. Again, I think many of you who are listening to this in your car, while working out, on a walk, whatever it may be, are probably attempting to figure out what are the 5 shots left. I bet most of you can guess 4 of them pretty darn easily. We'll get to them. Number 5 is maybe the one that wouldn't be guessed. Number 5, this is a shot by Casey Calvary. It is a game-winning lay-in coming off of a missed shot in a game where Gonzaga upset a higher-ranked team in the NCAA tournament. but it is not the shot. It is not the runner. We will, of course, get to the runner, the iconic shot that's coined the phrase slipper still fits and all of that. This shot came in 2001 against Virginia as a 12-5 upset for Gonzaga. In this game, Dan Dicko was driving to the basket with 10, 11 seconds to go, something like that, drove to the paint, got blocked at the rim. Casey Calvary leapt up, grabbed the ball out of the air, fought through traffic, laid it in. 9 seconds left in that contest, gave Gonzaga a lead. They played good defense on the other end. In fact, Casey Calvary got a block and a rebound on the other end, secured the basketball. That was the game for Gonzaga. 12-5 upset, beat that 2001 Virginia team. And this shot is so critical to me because it really helped establish that Gonzaga is legit. I read some articles that came out around the time that this game happened, and the Virginia coach and everybody was saying, look, this team is for real. And it's funny because now, of course, Gonzaga is for real. It's just silly to even say that. But in 2001, saying like, yeah, this isn't just some fluky team. And again, this was only 2 years afterwards. It was only Mark Few's second year as a head coach. And for Casey Calvary to still have had the kind of impact on the program helped lead them to another monumental victory. When they were an 11 seed going all the way to the Elite Eight, it was a tremendous story. Now they're a 12 seed and they're pulling off upsets still. They're still doing it. Dan Dickow, of course, a critical part of this is a transfer from Washington who was an All-American, a top draft pick, and really helped solidify Gonzaga's place on the map. There's no question about Dickow's influence, but it was Calvary who put the ball in. It was Calvary who made the stop on the other end of the floor. He was the one who won that game in 1999, and he was the one who won this game in 2001. Again, Gonzaga didn't make a huge run in 2001 the way that they had in the past, but it continued to prove to the powers in college basketball that this was a team that is not just going to go away. They were not, what ended up happening at George Mason or Loyola Chicago or some of those other programs. They were there to stay. And of course, a few years later, you have the epic Arizona game that we talked about. A few years after that, Adam Morrison's on campus, and bing, bang, boom. Now Gonzaga is in that conversation permanently. But I don't know if it happens without shots like this one from Casey Calvary. Top four, one of the ones that we're waiting for, the one that spawned this question in the first place. Julian Strawther, game-winning three over UCLA, March 23rd, 2023, just a few months ago. This was a monumental shot. Julian Strawther solidified his place in Gonzaga basketball history. He probably already had it with the 40-point game against Portland. He probably already had it with the game winner over BYU. But man, oh man, this shot. Gonzaga overachieved last year. I said that on the podcast. I'll say it again here. It does not mean that Gonzaga was a bad team last year, but a Sweet 16 appearance from that team was kind of where it felt like they deserved to finish. They played a UCLA team that was tough, that was battling some injuries. And that UCLA team made a big comeback. It looked like it was going to be 2006 all over again. It looked like maybe the Jalen Suggs shot had only reinvigorated the partnership, and now UCLA was going to get their revenge. They were going to do it again. And then Julian Strawther, I don't know if UCLA forgot to watch the tape on that BYU game or if they just didn't think he could do it again, but it was basically the same play, basically the same shot. Julian Strawther pulls up, 10 or so seconds to go, nothing but the bottom of the net. Gonzaga advances to the Elite Eight. Of course, we know what happened there. We don't need to rehash it too much. UConn came in and took care of business in that one, but Gonzaga making the Elite Eight last season was a tremendous story. Gave Drew Timme one more game in his uniform, gave Strother himself one more game in a Gonzaga basketball uniform, and again helped solidify the Gonzaga-UCLA tournament rivalry, which is one of the best in college basketball for a variety of reasons, including another shot still on this list, of course, but for Strother, a feather in his cap of a tremendous Gonzaga basketball career and another story, another chapter in the Gonzaga-UCLA heated West Coast rivalry that is ongoing. Number three, again, I think we all know the top three at this point. Jordan Matthews, three over West Virginia, March 23rd, 2017. Again, 6 years later on the day was Julian Strawther's shot. So number 4 and 3, both on March 23rd. When all of your best shots in program history come in late March, that's a pretty darn good sign that what you're doing as a program is working. Jordan Matthews, this was the third Elite Eight for Gonzaga, and he sent them there with a three-pointer against West Virginia in the final seconds. I think it was about 40 seconds to go. Josh Perkins out on a fast break, throws it cross court to Jordan Matthews from 3. He hits it. He gives one of the all-time stank faces in Gonzaga history, in college basketball history. I'll say it. If you haven't watched that clip in a while, go look at Jordan Matthews' face after he hits that 3. It is one of the meanest, stankiest faces that I have ever seen, and it was completely earned. Of course, that game also gets credit for Nigel Williams-Goss and the mystifying play at the end of the game by West Virginia's Javon Carter, who just dribbled for 28 seconds and could not get even remotely close to a good shot in that game. Great defense by Nigel Williams-Goss. Gonzaga wins that contest, goes to the Elite Eight, of course, pounds Xavier to go to the Final Four, first Final Four in school history. We know what happened after that. South Carolina, Killian Tilly hits those 2 free throws, goes to the national championship game. Things didn't work out there against North Carolina, but none of that happens. They don't make the first Final Four. They don't make the first national championship game without Jordan Matthews hitting this 3, a critical, crucial shot from a player that will never be forgotten. He played 1 year at Gonzaga and was a productive but not incredibly memorable player outside of this one shot, but he will forever be cemented in Gonzaga lore because of this shot. Number 2, and it was tough to choose between these two. Some people will disagree. Casey Calvary himself believes that his shot is the second greatest in Gonzaga history, or at least he certainly believes that the other shot, Jalen Suggs' shot, is the number 1 shot in Gonzaga history. So we're going to roll with that. Number 2, the runner. The shot that put Gonzaga basketball on the map. The shot that I think I can say this with complete and fluid honesty. If Casey Calvary does not make this shot, I don't think I have a podcast. I don't think I have a job. I may not work at the Locked On Podcast Network, where I cover the Zags, cover college basketball. I'm a writer for this company, helping launch the website. All of the things that I do professionally right now, I don't think happen without Casey Calvary's tip-in. And I cannot say that for the Jalen Suggs shot. I cannot say that for any other shot on this list at all. And that is hard for me to not have it at number 1. But Jalen Suggs' shot was so incredible and was so iconic and so memorable and sent them to a dang national championship game. Casey Calvary's shot, though, was the defining moment for Gonzaga. Gus Johnson screaming "the slipper still fits" is a all-time Gonzaga moment. There's a reason the SB Nation website is named that. A truly iconic moment. Quentin Hall misses that little runner. Casey Calvary gets the tip in, puts it in. They beat Florida. They continue to advance. That 1999 team's magical run continues for another game. They played UConn, and they only lost by 5. That kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit. Gonzaga had a chance to beat the team that ended up winning the championship in 1999. Sound familiar? Yeah, it sounds familiar to me too. But for Gonzaga, they almost made it to the Final Four and that incredible run in 1999. But they don't get there without this Calvary tip-in. An all-time fantastic moment. It gives me chills every time I watch it. I could watch it every morning for the rest of my life, and I would still feel that way about this shot. But I could also say the same for number 1 on this list. I could watch Jalen Suggs' half-court shot against UCLA every single day, and I would still be happy. And I did not see the Casey Calvary shot live. I was 9 years old. I was not yet a Gonzaga basketball fan. That did not happen until I was in high school, and of course really picked up when I was in college. But I saw the Jalen Suggs shot live. I had not yet started at Locked On Zags, but I was hosting the Score Zags Score podcast. Many of you were listening to that podcast at the time and listened to the post-game show. I appreciate every single one of you who has been with me for that long. But I was in my apartment in Seattle, and I didn't have enough room to run around, but I got up as soon as that shot went in. I ran into the kitchen. I ran back into the living room, scared the heck out of my dog. She didn't know what I was doing. But that was that was such a great game too. 90-90 in the final minutes. Johnny Juzang gets that missed shot, lets that lay in. They get the ball into Jalen Suggs. I can't believe we're about to go into overtime. I feel borderline defeated. Like, are we going to be able to pick up the pieces here and win this thing in overtime? Jalen Suggs gets a step past half court, pulls up, banks that bad boy in, and it's just a jaw-dropping moment to hear Adam Morrison's call, the cathartic yell, knowing that they had kind of exercised his demons for the loss against UCLA back in 2006. Folks, I'm getting chills just talking about it. I'm not even going to lie to you. In an all-time moment, Suggs jumping on the table, pounding his chest, all of the moments there were just unbelievable. Jalen Suggs will be forever. He didn't need to make this shot to be an icon in Gonzaga basketball history. If Gonzaga still won that game in overtime, still went to the national championship game, Jalen Suggs would be forever talked about, led this team to an undefeated season until they ran into a buzzsaw that was the Baylor Bears in 2021. I think that that was one of the greatest Gonzaga basketball seasons of all time, if not the greatest Gonzaga basketball season of all time. It's pretty hard to beat a team where you only lose one game the entire season. And for Jalen Suggs to have won that UCLA game again, put that rivalry back at the forefront of everybody's minds, all-time moment. You could really kind of go either way with these two. One of them probably had a more profound impact on the program going forward in the runner, of course. But Jalen Suggs' shot was more memorable in the sense that it was a 37-foot three-pointer at the buzzer, and it would sent them to a national championship game, which is, of course, different than sending them into the Elite Eight, which was still magnificent at the time for an 11-seeded team that nobody had ever heard of. So many fantastic shots in Gonzaga basketball history. There are so many we forgot. Again, please leave comments. Let me know what you think I forgot, what you think should be added, what you think order should be changed, all that good stuff. Happy to engage in that discourse here. I think it's fun to talk about these kind of things. And Gonzaga basketball gives us a really rich history of those kinds of shots and performances to discuss. And that's going to do it for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll come back with more fantastic stuff later this week into next week as well. Get some guests lined up before we start those player preview series in October. Craziness in the Kennel, a month away as I'm recording this here on September 7th. October 7th is the date. We are going to get a chance to see June Sok Yo, Luka Krajnovic, Dusty Stromer, Braden Huff, everybody else. Of course, Ryan Nembhard, Graham EK, Steel Ventures, the whole dang team. 1 month away. I am so excited. Stick here with Locked On Zags, again, available wherever you get your podcast. We are also available on YouTube. Go hit that subscribe button. Would love to be at 2,000 subscribers before the Craziness game on October 7th. I have no doubt that we can get there, but go do your part and help us out. It is much appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.